More than 20 years ago, I had my first encounter with the personality assessment tool called the Enneagram. I was part of a group of seminary students invited to take the test and learn more about the Enneagram tool. Now, this was not part of our regular seminary coursework. Instead, it was offered by the minister serving the church across the street from the seminary. Now, if you're familiar with the Enneagram, there's some of this that you'll recognize, but if you're not, I will just briefly mention it's a personality tool, which through self-assessment sorts people into 9 interconnected types. And it's often used in the business world, similar to the Myers-Briggs typology indicator, which is a little more widely known. The Myers-Briggs uses 16 types and is known by a string of 4 letters, whereas the Enneagram results are simply the numbers 1 through 9. I'm a 4, in case you wondered. As I was saying, I had my first opportunity to take the Enneagram when I was in seminary. That was the other distinction of the Enneagram. Other personality tests were designed for businesses, but the Enneagram was meant for spiritual exploration and self-development as well. So traditionally, it is when we are students, often when we are children, that we are encouraged to spend time in the pursuit of self-knowledge, of self-development. Or if we enter a particular field or career, we might be so encouraged, such as if you're a philosopher or a minister. Most of us, as adults, end up defining ourselves by what we do, what we get paid for. It can be difficult to tease out who we are apart from our work. But through the ages, philosophers and great thinkers have extolled the virtue of self-examination in the pursuit of wisdom. In his famous essay, Apology, Plato describes the trial of Socrates. The elder philosopher is accused of corrupting the youth of Athens with his teachings, and Socrates is given a choice of punishment, either death or exile. And as a rationale for accepting death over exile, Socrates said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." Similarly, ages later, Henry David Thoreau would proclaim, "I want to live deep and suck out all the marrow of life, to live so sturdily and Spartan-like as to put to rout all that was not life." Thoreau, however, would have been fine with exile. He was happy to go off on his own. Socrates came to a different conclusion. I suspect that Socrates and Thoreau would, while disagreeing on methods, would have agreed on the ultimate goal. Likewise, Emerson and Aristotle, Shakespeare and Schweitzer, Camus and Lao Tzu, Simone de Beauvoir and Sigmund Freud, again and again, the message is offered that the way to wisdom is through some form of examination of the self, contemplation of life. Philosophers and sages throughout time have followed the dictum of Socrates. To know thyself is the beginning of wisdom. But here's the really interesting part. Often, when you do that deeper work on yourself, you tend to also have a greater capacity to understand and relate to others. So let's consider our work this morning, to know ourselves, to learn what we may of life through self-examination. And our first point of reference shall be to acknowledge that the self is a dynamic, growing reality. You're not going to take a course in yourself and finish after a semester or take a test and discover everything you need to know about yourself and be done. We are always growing and changing. Reverend A. Powell Davies said, Life is a chance to grow a soul. And as May Sarton begins her poem, which we used as our reading, now I become myself. And Socrates spent a lifetime uncovering self-knowledge. And so it will be for each of us. All of this is well and good, but let us admit that philosophers and sages tend to have competing ideas about what the self is and how best one is to go about examining it. This can be daunting. But let me offer you this reflection from physician and poet Lewis Thomas from his book, The Medusa and the Snail. He wrote about the effort to figure out just exactly what the self is, saying, I have had more selves than I can possibly count or keep track of, and sometimes they're all present at once, clamoring for attention, whole committees of them, a house committee, a budget committee, a grievance committee, even a committee on membership, although I don't know how any of them ever got in, no chairman ever, certainly not me, and at most I'm some sort of administrative assistant. There's never an agenda. At the end, I bring the refreshments. Which, of course, leads me to think of that old Walt Whitman assertion that do I contradict myself? Very well. Then I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes. In short, our project this morning is to recognize that we are vast. We are both dynamic and growing, and there's multitudes of identity contained within this self that I call Douglas, within the self out there that you call yourself. So allow me to offer a guiding principle for this journey. Something not as profound as what the philosophers have offered, but hopefully something that is enough of an opening to spur your own further exploration. My guiding principle is this: pursue this inquiry into yourself with the style and rigor of the scientific method, even though there is no way it can be a scientifically valid pursuit. The primary reason such a line of inquiry can't be scientific is that the self is a purely subjective perspective. Many of these personality inventories, such as the Enneagram and the Myers-Briggs, are considered pseudoscience because they are subjective and not grounded in the scientific process. They are not replicable. They make unfalsifiable claims and rely on confirmation bias and subjective input, and they're not open to evaluation and refutation from outside. This is not to say they lack value or cannot lead a person to understanding and insight. It simply means it's not science, while being at risk of seeming like science. I'm actually suggesting we lean into that. For many years, astrology was considered on a par with medicine, astronomy, alchemy, and meteorology, a perspective not challenged until the 19th century and the adoption of the scientific method by the majority of academics and intellectuals of the Western world. So today, astrology is denigrated as unscientific. My suggestion is to try any tool available to you in this pursuit of self-knowledge. To do so with the methods science uses. Make hypotheses, rely on experience and logic, test ideas, be willing to reach some conclusions, but don't cling to them when new evidence contradicts those old conclusions. Just know that it all happens in the subjective realm. Your personality, your essence, is not something to be corroborated by peer review. Your resulting behaviors can be corroborated, but the self is by definition subjective. It's like this. I took one of these tests and it told me that I am an introvert. I considered this and I agree with this assessment. And yet from time to time, People are surprised to learn that I'm an introvert. I'm gregarious and I'm outgoing in many group settings. You must be an extrovert, I am told. But my personality is not something to be corroborated by peer review. It is subjective. You can't tell me that I'm not an introvert. You can say, are you sure you're an introvert? Your behavior suggests otherwise. And then we can have an interesting conversation about it, and in which we can each explore more deeply our own self-awareness. Remember what Lewis Thomas and Walt Whitman offered. While we may reduce the ideas down to a word or two, introvert, extrovert, the ideas remain vast and multitudinous. And remember what May Sarton and others offered. It's a process of becoming. We evolve and grow. We live into ourselves. Our lives and our experiences impact who we are. It's not just something we're born with. It is well documented that our personalities are the product of our genetics and our environment together. You know, that old argument of nature versus nurture, turns out the answer is both. I was attending a conference this past week online on revolutionary love. This is a national conference that happens every year. It's centered around liberal religious values in the public sphere. One of the presenters, Mickey Scott-B. Jones, was talking about the role of grief in the work of creating justice. And she referred to an old Christian hymn about the refiner's fire. The experience of the refiner's fire, she reminded us, is different from that of other fires. Other fires will only damage you. You will be hurt. They will cause destruction and injury, trauma. But the refiner's fire burns away impurities. Grief, she said, can be like the refiner's fire. In the refiner's fire, the impurities are burned away and you become more truly you. We have experiences that bring our true self more clearly to the front in our living. The Velveteen Rabbit suggests that we become more truly ourselves by being worn away a bit through being loved into our true form. It's an example of how our experiences can impact and alter our personalities, can shape who we are and how we become ourselves. One of the conclusions that Lewis Thomas reached in all of that silly conversation about committees inside of himself is that the self can only be understood in the context of the world. Who you are is caught up in the context of everything going on around you. So are you inventive, efficient, risk avoidant? Are you curious, confident, compassionate? I have found the exploration personally invigorating. Some of these personality inventories have given me valuable feedback about my temperament, about how I approach being a parent, being a pastor, being a person. I don't agree with everything that every test has ever told me, but all of it has been grist for the mill to learn more about myself. In turn, a deeper self-awareness has revealed to me a richer awareness of others. All of this has helped me continue to grow and become myself. All fuses now falls into place, May Sarton tells us. From wish to action, word to silence. My work, my love, my time, my face, gathered into one intense gesture of growing like a plant. in a world without end. May it be so.